Well, to walk in her footsteps is clearly quite emotional for me. But I think as much as she did then, there is still so much to do. But without question, if she hadn't have campaigned the way that she did 22 years ago, this could arguably still be a minefield.
Prince Harry's recent trip to Angola was supposed to be powerful, maybe even healing. He came with a mission to carry on a legacy that's always felt more like his mother's than his own. Landmine clearance with the Halo Trust, the very cause that once earned Princess Diana the world's respect. But what happened next was a sobering reality check. Legacy alone can't buy trust, and it doesn't guarantee support. His $15 million loan request to the Angolan government wasn't just turned down, it was rejected with a message that cut far deeper than money ever could. According to reports, the president of Angola looked him in the eye and said, "We don't trust you as patron."
It clearly matters a lot to you that this work should be finished.
Of course, I think in today's world there seems to be this habit of sort of unfinished business or jobs being half done, and I think this is Angola, but also landmines across the world.
It wasn't the rejection that made headlines, it was the way it was delivered and what it quietly revealed. Behind closed doors in Luanda, Harry had arranged a formal sit-down with top government officials, including President João Lourenço. What was expected to be a standard diplomatic chat, just under an hour long, ended instead with tense handshakes and a silence so heavy, it echoed well beyond the palace gates. This might have stayed under wraps globally, if not for what surfaced the next day. Senior Angolan insiders leaked unsettling details, a proposal full of red flags. It asked for government funds to be sent directly to a foreign foundation, all in the name of charity, but curiously, without any government oversight. What really baffled officials wasn't just the pitch itself. It was the unspoken arrogance behind it. Because to them, this wasn't about clearing minefields. It was about who was doing the asking. And Harry's past with charities isn't spotless. The Invictus Games, his biggest initiative, has faced growing scrutiny, especially around where the money goes and how it's reported. Even with its fame and celebrity backing, trust from donors hasn't exactly held strong.
And we begin in Angola, where President-elect João Manuel Goncalves Lourenço will be sworn in today in a ceremony in Luanda, Angola's capital. He succeeds José Eduardo dos Santos, who has been in power for 38 years.
Those concerns, it seems, have followed him across borders, right into Luanda. They surfaced in careful words during a high-level briefing where finance officials didn't hold back. They questioned the logic of channeling massive development loans through a private foundation overseas. At the center of it all was Harry's firm push that Archewell, the foundation he started with Meghan Markle, should take the lead in managing and overseeing the entire landmine clearance operation. Ask ChatGPT.
In attendance, regional and global leaders. Some of them may include South African President Thabo Mbeki, Namibia's Age Geingob, and Cuba's Vice President Miguel Diaz-Canel, who is leading a delegation to the ceremony. Angola held its election on August.
From a humanitarian lens, it might have seemed collaborative, maybe even forward-thinking. But in Angola, where the scars of post-colonial economic control still run deep, it sparked instant concern. Why now? Officials asked. Why should a foreign, celebrity-led organization be given control over millions in development funds with no formal auditing link to the state? This wasn't some bureaucratic footnote. Angola's economy, still recovering from years of war and corruption, is tightly watched by financial boards and global watchdogs. Every major fund transfer must be tracked, not just with receipts.
The Liberation Movement of Angola, MPLA, securing the majority of the votes. The MPLA won 150 votes in parliament, while UNITA got 51, and the coalition, the remaining 16 seats. Angola uses a single constituency electoral system of...
But in Angola, it's not just about receipts, it's about chains of responsibility. When Harry was asked who'd be held accountable if targets weren't met or if the money went off course, his responses, according to those in the room, were vague at best. He leaned on ideals like goodwill, reputation, and legacy. But in Luanda, those don't replace legal contracts or financial safeguards. Perhaps most revealing was what came next, a quiet statement from the Halo Trust. The tone was calm, almost diplomatic. But what stood out wasn't what they said. It was what they didn't. There was no mention of Harry's proposal at all.
Election of members of parliament, and then the candidate of the party that wins the most votes becomes the president.
63-year-old João Lourenço promised to be the man of economic miracle, an ambitious project looking at the difficult economic and financial situation of the country.
Instead, the statement simply reaffirmed that all current mine clearance efforts in Angola were funded through established international development partners, with full transparency and strict audits in place. And in that silence, the message was loud. The Halo Trust was not backing Harry's financial push. For Harry, it marked yet another moment where the weight of his past influence couldn't quite carry him forward. The son of Princess Diana, once celebrated for following in her humanitarian path, now finding that legacy alone no longer guarantees trust?
While in the continent, which derives 70% of its tax revenue and the bulk of its currencies, still suffers from the significant decline of oil prices to the point where the trade balance is in deficit since 2014. The new president-elect, who wants to tackle corruption, also takes over a country where his predecessor is accused of looting the...
He found himself alone in a foreign capital, asking for help that never came. His mother's memory was brought up, but it didn't land. The minefields Diana walked in Huambo back in 1997 were dangerous, yes, but they carried hope. Her presence felt real, grounded, and powerful in its quiet sincerity. Harry's approach, by contrast, came off as calculated, transactional, and unclear. Maybe the comparison isn't entirely fair. After all, the world and its expectations have changed.
Actually the one designated by President Eduardo dos Santos, but at the same time he takes over power at the head of a system that is still very dependent on his predecessor José Eduardo dos Santos, who remains the head of the party. This is really a very important point in a country where the ruling party plays such a central role.
And the world of international development has only grown more complicated. But that complexity is exactly why organizations are no longer swayed by emotion or legacy alone. They want structure, clear plans, measurable outcomes, firm timelines, and above all, trust. And right now, that's something Harry appears to be missing. His meeting in Angola also came at a moment when uncertainty around his royal status continues to grow. The royal will, reportedly sealed since Queen Elizabeth II's death, still hasn't been made public. And the questions keep building.
White elephant or mountain elephant species that end up giving birth to a mouse, but rather in what is the strong point of agriculture in a country like Angola, namely the small producers who, if they were supported, could massively increase domestic production, reduce the dependence of the country from...
Speculation about the will's content still lingers in both the press and diplomatic circles, with some insiders quietly suggesting that financial uncertainty and the absence of institutional recognition may be fueling Harry's increasingly unpredictable international ventures, and whether that theory holds weight or not, what remains undeniable is that Harry now moves within a void, separated from the structures that once gave him authority, yet still attempting to command the same level of influence. And this tension of claiming freedom while relying on royal legacy is beginning to show its strain. As governments take notice, charities grow hesitant, and even long-standing supporters start to question their faith. Because what happened in Angola wasn't merely a financial setback, it was a reputational shockwave that demonstrated how quickly doors can close when trust and status are no longer assumed, especially in diplomatic circles where rejections of this scale are rare and typically softened with careful language, rerouted diplomatically, or handled behind the scenes. But Angola's decision was clear, intentional, and pointed. It wasn't just a no, it was a statement that after reviewing the proposal and assessing the risks, they saw Harry's involvement as a liability rather than an asset. And the weight of those words, "We don't trust you as patron," now echoes not just through Luanda, but across the international landscape where Harry's actions are being watched with growing discomfort, because this isn't the first time he's been turned away. Private donors have become less eager, former allies more cautious, and now a head of state has drawn a public line. And what's more troubling is the emerging pattern. As over the past year, Harry has repeatedly tried to reshape himself into a global humanitarian figure, but with every effort, the scrutiny deepens. The lingering issues around the Invictus Games' financial transparency remain unresolved, and even his collaborations with tech companies on mental health platforms have sparked criticism for being vague, inconsistent, and lacking clarity. Measured results matter now more than ever, and even Archewell, which once promised bold, transformative impact, has yet to produce outcomes that meet the expectations of serious nonprofit governance, and against that reality, Angola's rejection doesn't feel like a one-off event. It feels like a turning point, a test that wasn't failed purely because of paperwork or process, but because of the growing shadow of doubt that trails Harry everywhere he goes. A doubt not driven by scandal, but by inconsistency, where sweeping promises are too often followed. By unclear execution, where noble missions seem entangled with personal ambitions. Where legacy is invoked, but leadership remains unproven, and beneath it all, there's a very human layer, because Harry, by all accounts, truly believed this visit could mark a new beginning. He retraced Diana's footsteps through the minefields, recreated her iconic images, and spoke of fresh partnerships and long-term goals. But in today's development world, vision without structure isn't a strategy, and passion without accountability doesn't count for much. So, Angola's decision to reject the loan may well be a way of safeguarding its own institutions from unnecessary exposure. But it also sends a broader signal to global stakeholders watching from afar that the old rules are fading fast, that a royal title no longer guarantees trust, and that even Diana's name, deeply admired as it is, can't override the modern demand for transparency, structure, and credibility. And while Harry may yet find countries willing to take the call, may revise his pitch, hire sharper advisors, or overhaul Archewell to align with international standards, what he cannot afford to overlook is the shift in how he's now seen, because he's no longer granted trust by default, no longer treated as a patron simply because of who he is, and going forward, every opportunity must be earned, not inherited, and that truth will shape whatever comes next. Whether he chooses to reflect and evolve or double down on a path that so far has delivered more resistance than results remains uncertain, but in the world of global goodwill, moments like Angola's quiet but firm refusal are never just diplomatic, they are deeply telling. These moments aren't just diplomatic formalities, they're verdicts. Not always final, but rarely forgotten. And what made this particular situation even more glaring was the silence from British diplomatic channels, because in years past, an engagement of this scale, especially one tied to major humanitarian goals, would typically carry at least a subtle nod of support from the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, yet this time there was nothing, no quiet endorsement, no behind-the-scenes coordination, nothing to signal official backing. And so, Harry arrived in Angola not as a royal envoy, not as a diplomat, and not even as a vetted development partner recognized by the UK government, but simply as a private citizen, pitching a private plan and asking for public money from a foreign state. And that distinction didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it framed the entire rejection, because within diplomatic circles there had already been quiet discussions underway about who might be better suited to lead Angola's mine-clearing partnerships. And those names included seasoned humanitarians, respected scientists, and African leaders with decades of experience and deeply rooted ties to post-conflict recovery efforts. People with records of transparency, accountability, and alignment with Angola's long-term goals. So when Harry's proposal surfaced, it felt out of sync, rushed, underdeveloped, and disconnected from the country's current strategy for rebuilding, and that disconnect was made even more obvious by the optics of the visit itself. Because when Harry landed in Luanda, there were no formal welcomes, no ceremonial honors, none of the protocol usually reserved for royals or foreign envoys. Instead, he was quietly greeted by a mid-level official from the Ministry of Culture. No red carpet, no cabinet reception, no national press conference. Just a quiet escort through the terminal and out of the spotlight. And in the world of diplomacy, gestures like that speak volumes. It wasn't just modesty, it was a message. A quiet but unmistakable signal that this visit was unofficial, unendorsed, and perhaps unwelcome.